Hey, it's Matt Robison, Beyond Politics. I'm going to do something extemporaneous, totally unplanned. I like when I'm preparing for a podcast or a live stream video to prepare. I'm a notes guy. I like to do deep research. I like to know where I'm going. Can I do things off the cuff? Sure, I can, but it's not when I'm at my best. So I'm going to throw all of that out the window completely today. And I'm going to do a conversation that is more or less entirely off the cuff. My old friend and podcast partner, Matt Wylie, a conservative, a Republican, a campaign manager, a communications advisor, definitely known in Republican circles, sent me his latest column a few days ago. And it was about the Jimmy Kimmel firing and about the assault on free speech. And I thought this would be great. This would be a great topic to have a conversation about. And then, of course, the world moved and Jimmy Kimmel was brought back on. And Trump went down an entirely different route with clamping down on the judicial system. And it just opened up whole new avenues of what's become of the Republican Party, what's become of the federal government under Donald Trump. And I wanted to have Matt on to have a conversation about that. So we were literally just chatting a moment ago, and we talked about a few themes that we might get into. But beyond that, I have no idea where this is going to go. So with that, I'm going to bring on Matt Wylie. Here you are. You've been lurking backstage. Matt, if we get into here are the ground rules. If we get into some uncomfortable territory, which I think we're about to, you can at any point, we can UFC this. You can tap out. You can signal to the ref, mate. You don't want to go any further like in kickboxer. So let's start here.
Bring it on. And I think probably the most important conversation today, and you didn't even touch on it. Did they break the escalator intentionally and the teleprompter and the audio? Was this really three things they did against Trump
at
the
the UN?
UN?
Trump is blaming his unhinged UN rant?
Well, yes.
He said the teleprompter was broken. I knew about the escalator being broken.
The escalator was broken. But I don't know if you've seen this video. Like he walks in, him and Melania get on the escalator and it stops. And there's this moment where he just stands there and looks around. Now, the escalator right next to him is still working. But like a New Yorker, he didn't get out and go on that escalator. They just start walking straight up there. So it wasn't as dramatic as I saw the speech and heard about the escalator, finally saw the video. But no, the escalator, teleprompter just went dark. He had no notes, so we can do it. And then all of a sudden the audio wasn't quite working. So the people in the assembly could not hear it. So it's a conspiracy.
Yes. It is amazing how someone who is constantly crowing about his own power, his own greatness, he's the only one who can solve this. I alone have the answer. I alone am
Seven
the one
wars.
who's
7
going to make the
wars.
decision. Every problem, every setback, someone else's fault. Oh, you got indicted? You've been indicted 98 times? Oh, nope, someone else's fault. It's conspiracy. Your tariffs are creating an economic meltdown. That's Joe Biden's fault. It's always someone else's fault. Let's start where you started, because I think the theme that's coming through here, your article, which was great, which I really enjoyed. I wrote in Newsweek that the Jimmy Kimmel firing had crossed a red line. It was exerting federal government power, the executive branch, the full force of not just the executive branch, but the judicial branch to attack free speech. And that was a difference in kind. It was a horse of a different color, an entirely new front in the assault on free speech. And you wrote something remarkably similar, obviously from a different end of the political spectrum, but reaching the same conclusion. But I think things, as I set up extemporaneously a moment ago, I think things have taken a remarkable turn. But we can start with the UN speech. The UN speech was, by any objective measure, an embarrassing diatribe of disconnected thoughts. It seemed like, honestly, it seemed a mentally unwell, somewhat senile elder American had wandered into a public forum. And if we had any compassion in us, we would have ushered him away and gotten him medical attention. And I posed this question. I posed it to Dan Perry, the former lead AP editor for the Middle East and Europe, posed it to other international affairs experts. Is there anyone left on earth who's not like Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin? Is there anyone left on earth in the free world who isn't laughing at this guy? Is there anyone who
So
takes him as a serious person, anything other than an embarrassment? And the answer is no, the entire world. This is like a reversal of the emperor has no clothes. We've reached a point where in the emperor has no clothes, the entire crowd plays along, and it takes
mhm.
one little boy to say, hey, this guy's freaking nude over here. And you're making fun of New Yorkers. I
Right.
resemble that remark. But now we've reversed it. Now the entire world, the entire crowd is pointing at this insane, deranged person. And it's only in the US, only among the US media, where we're sort of playing along and feeding into the delusion that this is anything other than a mad person. I mean, at what point does this make you absolutely cry in your Republican cornflakes?
See, I have a little different take on that speech than you do here. I think it was by design. Like I think it's easy to say this is a guy just the mad ramblings of a deranged individual and somebody should have shut off that mic. I think it's by design. I think to some respect the Kimmel and the UN speech and the lawfare, these all are intertwined. I think that was a perfectly good campaign speech. It's a campaign speech because he mentioned Joe Biden more than anybody else in that entire remarks. He walked in almost saying, Joe Biden, Joe Biden, Joe Biden. He blamed him for everything and then patted himself on the back for everything else. He went in there aggressive. It was UFC. That was the
Mhm.
mentality here. We're going to call out our allies for freeloading, give us the hostages back. You guys are wrong. It's a con job on climate change. If you strip all that away, this is a speech to the MAGA base. This is a speech to that devoted side, that cult following that has gotten into our party, that is sitting here, and it gives him the political capital. One of the things I wrote about this week, because I did sort of find it entertaining from that perspective, is it wasn't going to be statesmanship, it wasn't diplomacy. If you bank that political capital, if you walk in and you do what every Republican has probably wished they would do at the UN and just call out all the people and all the wrongs and our airing of grievances, you rally that base to a point where they just don't care if you take Kimmel off the air. You don't care about free speech because you are just so excited about the reality TV show right now that the erosion of our liberties is not as important as tuning into the next episode, seeing what's going to happen next. Who are we going to attack next? And I think Trump is really good at the show. But what's happening is our liberties are eroding as it happens. And we're just looking the other way time in and time out. So from a world leader diplomacy, it was a horrible speech. From a pure political, I want to shut down the government next week. I want to limit your speech. I want to go after the press. This gives you cover. This gets your base back on the side. It distracts from Epstein. It distracts from all the other stuff. And it's just another extension of the MAGA playbook that gives him free ability to do whatever he wants to do.
I guess, look, I can accept your idea that this is a campaign speech. And from that standpoint, I could see how we've become so inured to the Trump trash fire. I don't know.
Dumpster fire. Yeah, dumpster fire.
Yes,
Yeah.
as a society and as a media, we've become so inured to it that we treat it as straight news. And most of the coverage of his UN speech, not by late night comedians, but most of the straight news coverage was kind of New York Times ease where they euphemize about he went on a campaign style diatribe. I don't know, similar
Mhm.
wording to what you used. But Let's examine this for just a moment here, because first of all, as the former fact checker for the Washington Post, Glenn Kessler, who, like a lot of writers in traditional media, has now fled the mainstream media outlet of his career and of his choice because they've sort of retreated under threat from, and he's fled to Substack. So as he wrote in his review of the UN speech, doing what he does best, checking facts, it was an insane fantasy land. It was lies, imagination. It was pure delusion. Now, one can say, and I think it's fair for you to say, okay, it was a campaign style speech. But in a way, that's the point, is we're just letting go of the fact that this is what a Trump campaign style speech is. And it's not just that he's giving it at the UN. It's that the entire world hears these things and they're not under a delusion. They're looking at this and this is humiliating. They're like, if you saw, again, someone who had some dementia, who had some mental illness problems, and you saw them in a public place melting down like this, you would hopefully feel embarrassment and compassion for them. And this is the leader of our country. He's making claims like, we're rapidly reversing the economic calamity we inherited. Actually, inflation peaked in 2022 and it's going back up under Trump. Lies about the stock market. He lies about gas prices. Workers' wages are rising at the fastest pace in more than 60 years. That is completely false. That is completely
false.
untrue.
100% false. 100% false. And I don't disagree with a single thing you just said. But my point is, one, it doesn't matter. It should. It should.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it should. Look, if we separate, well, let me go back to even before I started. Look, I would want my president, my Republican president, to walk into the United Nations and give a speech that would set the standard for America, push the bounds, call out our enemies, do the things that you would expect, pure diplomacy, pure statesmanship. That's what it should have been, right? We should have gone after terrorists. We should talk about those issues. I mean, it's you look at every president except for Trump on those addresses to the UN had a foreign policy goal that made sense. Could disagree with it. That's not the point here. But the foreign policy goal made sense. It was clear you understood where we were going. That wasn't what Trump wanted to do, but he didn't want to do it because the way I think Trump operates is there's this bank of political capital that exists out there. It's just there. And he throws money into it as fast as he can at every opportunity. He doesn't care about statesmanship. He wants to be isolationist. He wants to wield the hammer with tariffs. I think the speech was full of falsehoods, but that's not the thing that any of the hardcore MAGA is going to ever care about. They're going to care about the fact that he's in there swinging with both fists and he's going to light it up and he's saying the things that they want to hear him say. And I think this is the key point, is that gives him freedom, opportunity to do whatever else he wants to do. That's why his base never leaves him. That's why when everybody sort of says, when are Republicans going to stop doing this? When are Republicans going to stand up? It's because you got this majority out there who's just being fed things on social media. They're not reading the news. They see the attack as the thing they want to see, and they eat it up because it is a WWE, it is UFC, it's gladiator style politics at this point in time, that it doesn't really matter reality. Sad that's where we are. Sad that we can just disregard all facts. But for Trump, he just doesn't care about that world stage. He cares about being the alpha dog in the room, but he doesn't even care about that as much as he wants to make sure that his supporters see that. It is the reality TV side of it that allows him, like, look, the government shutdown, and this is a much deeper, but Trump 100% wants the government to shut down. Like, it gives him the ability to change the spending dynamics. He's going to shutter agencies. He's going to do, like, if the government shuts down, it's a win for him. It's going to hurt Americans, all that stuff, but it's a win for him which is why he cancels meetings with Democrats over, again, lies, demands that the Democrats want that never existed. The two are the same because what it does is it rallies his base behind him. It rallies influencers behind him. And so, yeah, look, I look at that speech and I have to ask myself constantly, what are the 7 wars that Donald Trump ended? Right? I pay attention to this stuff. I know which ones he's counting. I do. But for your average person who pays attention to this, your average person that is predisposed to support Trump, all you're hearing, all you're getting fed is I did 7 wars and the Democrats are lying about me. The press is lying about me.
So what you're saying is
it's by design.
There's an old story, and this is all right. This is why I like to prep, because I think slow. I'm like the old Daniel Kahneman thing, thinking fast, thinking slow. I think slow. I write slow, but I promise I'm going somewhere with this.
All right.
There's an old story from the founding of the state of Israel that at that time, if you owned a feather pillow, you could buy a house. And basically, the story goes, you could sell a good feather pillow for, they went by like the British money system, so like a pound at that point. With a pound, you could join a loan society and you could get a loan of 10 pounds. With 10 pounds, you could go to a builder and you could say, build a nice little house and you take the bottom floor for you and your family and rent it out. And they would build you the house. Anyway, it's a story of extreme leverage, of having a little narrow sliver of something and thereby controlling a much, much bigger pie. And what you're essentially saying is, this is a quote from Judd Gregg from back in 2015, former US Senator, Republican from New Hampshire, who said, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, Donald Trump's followers don't care what he says, as long as he continues to stick his thumb in the eye of all the forces they hate. And as long as the purpose of that UN speech and the purpose of most things he does, although I've argued that the ultimate purpose of things he does is to make more money for himself, but the political purpose of everything he does is to do what Judd Gregg said, maintain the rabid following, because it exercises strategic leverage. And as long as he holds that activist segment that is still affiliated with the Republican Party, even though they're in no sense conservative.
No.
They're not even really Republicans.
Not even a little bit.
But as long as he controls them, then, I mean, you've run a number of Senate campaigns. You've run a number of political campaigns. And I'm guessing that you would say to your clients, your Republican clients who are running for a statewide office, look, you cannot afford to lose a third of your base. Even if the majority of the party is soft on MAGA, non-MAGA, they're only tepid on Trump. If you lose them, you're done and you're going to lose overall. So here's my question to you. And I know that this is timely because you've written a new article. At what point is it too far for you and for the majority of Republicans that behind closed doors you talk with and work with? At what point do you say, you know what, enough is enough? If we all band together, then there are more of us than there are of them. And we've got to cut this cancer out of our party.
Look, there's a lot to unpack in that question. And I'm going to also take some time to get to those answers. I think, first of all, Judd Gregg is right. That is exactly what Trump wants to do. I think you got two intersecting things that are happening and upcoming to demonstrate that. One is the midterm elections. He needs to keep his base angry, engaged, because without question, if Republicans lose the House and the Senate, he is impeached again. Don't think the Senate will be enough to sort of do anything with that. But the thing you just sort of touched on briefly, I think is the bigger problem for him, is that this is about making money. I mean, Donald Trump, since earliest memories of Donald Trump, for all of us in our collective consciousness, has always been that guy, the 80s Gordon Gekko guy, that is greed is good. Let's figure and just, and I think there is a portion significant of every decision he is making does have to do with how he can and his family and whatever make more money, his friends, whatever, make more money. There is a level of corruption without a doubt inside of that. And that if Democrats maintain or get control in the midterms, not only are they likely to impeach, they are likely to expose. They're likely to find out and have the weight to do it and the weight to start to try and pass laws, things that Congress should be doing right now. I'm convinced a lot of this trade war and tariff problem has to do with somebody somewhere charged him too much in some country. And so now he's just going after everybody. Like it's, I know it's been part of his philosophy and his thoughts, and trade tariff policies are good. And I promise I'm getting somewhere here. But it's, I think that the way you can strip away these liberties is to poke the enemy in the eye, to poke the Democrats in the eye. By stripping away those liberties, it also hides the fact that he's making money off this stuff. And so if you have Democrats in control, it becomes an issue. So now you sort of fast forward here into the midterms. And as Republicans, our problem isn't that the MAGA base is 30% of that election. Our problem right now is that regular Republicans, regular conservative, regular Reagan Republicans are so fed up with this MAGA stuff that they're not even showing up in elections right now. They're not even showing up in primaries because they're starting to feel like it just doesn't matter anymore. So what I am seeing and what is developing on my end and the people that we are talking to and groups that exist out there, there's this group out there, Our Republican Legacy, which is a lot of Jack Danforth kind of guys that are starting to get involved and really push a 50-state strategy to start to engage Republicans, not MAGA. Because again, a lot of us who have lived and bled for the Republican Party for decades now will tell you Trump is not a Republican. Trump is pushing a brand of socialism. MAGA socialism is no better than what AOC and Mondami are pushing. Wearing a red hat doesn't make it less toxic. But what we are fighting against as a strategy session is finding those Republicans that want to run against it. And to those pathway to victories exist because, again, it's only really a third of that. And that's the high side. That's that MAGA angry. If you don't love Donald Trump and want to build him a statue, we're not voting for you. But that still gives us 70% at least of the Republican voting base that will vote for a normal, sensible Reagan Republican. We just got to get them to show up. And that's the challenge we are running into right now, is getting them because they feel so disconnected.
I think you're screwed. And I offer Exhibit A, Jody Ernst. Exhibit B, Tom Tillis.
Mm-hmm.
Time after time, there is no exercise in American politics more frustrating for Democrats than the, I don't know, monthly Susan Collins watch of when will Susan Collins fold? And the answer is as soon as she can possibly get away with it. Believe me, I spent 6 years in Maine politics working for members of Congress from the state of Maine. And she seems like a lovely person in person, Susan Collins.
She is. Yeah,
she's certainly very intelligent. She certainly knows her way around the Capitol. And there's a reason she's hung on so long. She's probably politically right. Yeah. Having so little backbone so much of the time. But time after time, there is an opportunity for a Republican leader to do what you're saying and to test the proposition that, look, if I give a robust alternative to MAGA Republicanism, I can win a primary, and then I can do what I want, what my conscience dictates. We
Mhm.
see this happening in real time with Bill Cassidy right now. The man
Mhm.
is a physician. He knows full well that Donald Trump's Tylenol announcement is going to kill more babies anyway, than the amount of autism it will prevent. He knows that. He knows that high fever, which Tylenol is the only medication that doctors will prescribe, high fever is a greater threat to fetuses than any link that's been
Mhm.
demonstrated between Tylenol and autism. Will he come out and say it? Will he come
No.
out and say, what RFK is doing is scientific madness? No. Why? Because he is up for reelection and there
Mhm.
is a threat of a MAGA primary. It's very real for him. And he's made the calculation that he not only probably could lose such a primary, but if he stands up to Trump, even if he wins the primary, he might be in trouble in a general election because the MAGA people would stay home. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, that is that again, at what point do you reach a point as a party? And I'm gonna extend this just for one more moment.
All right.
I want to be fair about this. You and I were talking about this for just a moment before we started recording. There are embarrassments in my party.
Oh
There
yeah.
are people and positions and things that members of my party have said that I don't feel good about. There are times in recent years, especially, where people on the left have gone too far for my taste, and I'm
Mhm.
not comfortable with it. But as I was saying to you a moment ago, I still feel like the Democratic Party is a reasonable home for me politically. It more or less represents my views. And even though the progressive left is ascendant, and that's not as good a match for my views, I still think that the core of the party is close to where I am, and that the extreme elements of my own party still are far from representing the majority. And critically, they don't exhibit the same kind of leverage power that you see reflected in the
Mhm.
Republican Party. I think the same cannot be said for Republicans. I think because of the examples of Tillis and Collins and Ernst and every other politician, I think they are fully a wholly owned subsidiary of Trump Incorporated. And so, at what point do Republicans who still consider themselves to be actual conservatives, because you're now in a post-conservative Republican Party,
Mhm.
at what point do you say, we cannot save this patient anymore?
I don't know if we will ever get to that point. I think most of us believe the patient can be saved. And I think that's where we are right now. Now, look, I think, go back a little bit here. I hate to give predictions a year out, but I think we get our butt kicked next November. Like, I just, history suggests Republicans are going to lose. We lose on average 20 seats. I think it's 20 seats in the House, 3 seats in the Senate. As you pointed out, we're starting to get Republicans that are leaving. Tillis, Ernst, countless members of Congress that would probably win are leaving. And whereas, like Ernst, Republicans probably don't lose that seat, but now we have to spend more money on it. And that's the thing, is there's resources we're going to have to spend there. Maybe the Democrats can put up a solid candidate. I don't know, but that means there's resources that are not going to go into New Hampshire, for example, because we got to go protect Iowa. Tillis, North Carolina, I think we probably lose. I think the demographics of North Carolina have started to change. I think a lot of people moving up from north to south during pandemic, and you look at the Republican registration, or more important, you look at the unenrolled, the independent registration's gone up, and that suggests to me those are people that have come down and are just in the habit, like in the Northeast, of just unenrolled. I think the Republican Party, it's when Richard Nixon resigned in 74. He talked about going through the wilderness and wrote about it in his book about going through the wilderness. And he went in and you never experienced. I'm paraphrasing here, but the highest mountain is never as great until you've gone through the deepest valley. I think we're heading towards that deepest valley as a party. And I think after Nixon resigned, the party was in shambles. We didn't know where to go. And then we had Reagan. And Reagan was always sort of around. So it wasn't like he just showed up, where we did usher in this era of conservatism. And then we had that kind of 1-2 punch where after Reagan, we started to see guys like Rush Limbaugh and others promoting conservatism, conservative values. And we talk all about it as an entertainer, whatever. Unfortunately, we don't have that person yet. I think Nikki Haley is probably our closest version of what that next Reagan looks like in our party. But I think we're going to go through some tough times. I think, again, it's MAGA socialism and it starts to feel good. Again, I go back to the UN speech. If you build up that political capital, when you then start to talk about taking control of companies, if you start talking about raising taxes through tariffs, you just go along with it. But eventually, the economy is going to crash. It's going to be a problem, and we're all going to feel it. And is it going to happen before next November? And Democrats can take advantage of it? Maybe. A lot depends still on who you nominate. If you get more Mondamis and AOCs and they become the face of your party, it becomes the path is a little easier for us next cycle. But the reality is we're on a trajectory down. We're not in the golden age of America. Our party is not going in that direction right now. You see it in approval ratings. The fact that Trump won doesn't say that people like him. It just says they did not like Harris. They didn't like the campaign she ran. They didn't like whatever issues that sort of came into play. And the fact that we're seeing Republicans start to abandon the Titanic before it hits the iceberg, I think is the proof that you need to see that we're starting to feel this problem. I think a lot of us, and I talk to a lot of us, are not willing to just give up on the party. Our goal is to take it back and to revitalize it and get it back to the principles that made it great. And recognizing that what we have now is not conservatism, it's not even republicanism, it's its own brand of whatever socialism, again, that has taken over our party. It's been a hostile takeover to some respect, but they did it through applause. They did it through the reality TV show. And it's a problem that is out there. But what I will say is where you don't see the conversations publicly, I can tell you we're all having them. We're all talking about how we're going to do it. And it's just finding the vehicles and the mechanisms to go after it. I think it's going to take us getting our butt kicked again. I think it's going to take us losing. I think to some extent we don't talk about the Tea Party anymore because they went through a couple cycles and we won some races and then they got swept out of office. And then we have people that still claim to be conservatives but don't defend conservatism. And I think those people are starting, and I think it's just a reordering of the deck chairs right now. But at some point in time, we will be able to take it back and get some reasonable debate because I think the party, look, it only survives with Trump. MAGA only survives with Trump. There is not someone who is coming next that can lead this. JD Vance is going to try it. He doesn't have that charisma. He doesn't have that ability. He will be stuck on planet Earth, whereas Trump can just say and do whatever he wants. Vance, Rubio is not really in that bucket as far as the pure MAGA stalwarts. There's just no one out there that can carry. Only Donald Trump could do what Donald Trump has done.
I take two things away here, and I'm not sure quite which direction I want to go in. So I'll let you pick. One is this takes me back to what David Frum wrote in The Atlantic 2 days ago, which is that what he's seeing in Trump ratcheting up the authoritarian moves, the clamping down on free speech, the instructing his attorney general to go after his political enemies, his political opponents, to indict them, to prosecute them, to jail them. The piece I wrote on the Worth Knowing Substack earlier this week, where I pointed out, per my live stream earlier this week, that in having the police and the prosecutors under his thumb, Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, he's essentially created a doom loop like a self-enclosed Tupperware sphere for his authoritarianism to keep it fresh. And Frum's point is he's ramping up all of these moves right now because he perceives that he's in a race against time. He is increasingly extraordinarily unpopular, and not just unpopular, loathed. 48% of Americans saying they strongly disapprove of him. When you have almost half the country, not just disapproving, but really loathing you, that is a political problem. Now, the question for Democrats is and has been, what do you do with that? If you have that public sentiment, how do you wield it? How do you make this race against time work? Because this really is a race to the midterms. Can we hold back the Trump tide long enough and preserve free and fair elections in 2026 to enough of an extent that we can claw back a little bit of restraint, a little bit of power in the form of at least holding the House of Representatives so that we can prevent the full authoritarian takeover? In my mind, it's going to become even more imperative for people like Patel and Bondi and these kleptocrats, these kind of like insufferable flying monkeys that he's brought into the administration, not just sycophants, but remora, like people suckling on Donald Trump for their sustenance and their freedom, because they're now fully embedded in the corruption. And so my first point is it's incumbent on Democrats to take the moment that you and I were both writing about last week, where a little bit of public backlash made ABC reverse course. And now Democrats should have woken up to the fact that, hey, you know what? The majority is with us. We actually have some strength. If we can focus it, we can wield that. We can use it. So that's point number one. You could pick up on that. The other thing, and this is way out in left field or right field, if you prefer, you probably do. You like right field.
I do. Yes. Yes.
That's your cup of tea. I understand. The other thing is, I think Democrats need to start preparing now with Republicans behind the scenes for what 2028 looks like, for what the Trump transition looks like. I think regardless of who wins in 2028, what you're telling me, what you're telling all of our viewers right now is that there is a majority, a silent majority, as Nixon would have it, within the Republican Party that actually is horrified by all this stuff.
Yes.
That actually is a gap and that wants to turn the page, that wants to move on. We have a shared interest then. You and I, all the Republicans like you, all the Democrats like me, we have a shared interest in preserving the Republic. You may not have as much of a shared interest. I think all of the Republicans you're referring to and you should vote for Democrats in House elections in order to preserve a guardrail against Trump to get to 2028. I think Republicans should be voting for Democrats for that reason. But besides that, I think we need to start to talk about 2028 and what that's going to look like. Because the danger here is that if Democrats win, they are going to there are going to be loud voices, and they're not necessarily wrong. They're going to say, look, if we're going to restore the rule of law, Kim Whaley, the ABC News legal analyst, was on my show 2 weeks ago saying that we're in a post-rule of law America. If we're going to restore the rule of law, we have to hold people accountable who are part of this administration, who are part of this corruption, who are breaking the law. People like Emil Bove who are saying, yeah, we're just going to ignore court orders. There's going to have to be some accountability there. Otherwise, the rule of law means nothing.
Right.
But I think in order to get to that point, in order to have a clean transition, we need to look to the South Africa model. I think that's how far things have gotten. I think we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think it needs to be bipartisan. And I think it needs to be empowered by Congress under the law to bring out the truth, to bring out transparency about the law breaking and corruption that has happened during the Trump administration, and not to pursue legal retribution, to pursue reconciliation. I think that's the only way that we're going to induce the Republicans you're talking about to come on board and to form an alliance a rebel alliance to stand against the empire here and to get us through 2028. And listen, if Republicans win, if there's a Republican president in 2028, then we're going to need this just as much to make sure that J.D. Vance or Nikki Haley or whoever it is doesn't take a Trump turn, because that's what's been set up, and because they need that MAGA base that Trump is still, if he's alive, still going to control.
So a lot there. Again, I think there's a couple ways I could take all of that. First and foremost, and one of the things I continue to warn publicly, is these erosions of rights and our liberties when we attack free speech. I've called free speech the lifeblood of liberty. And to dim even one voice dims liberty. But what I always warn MAGA is that you may like what Trump's doing. You may like the fact that he's taken Kimmel off the air, for example. But you were just angry when the Democrats tried to take Rush Limbaugh off. So if we sort of set these standards right now and we say, hey, fine, let's eliminate due process for whatever reason. Let's go after the press for whatever reason. Let's limit free speech for whatever reason. Democrats take over in 4 years. What are they going to limit? What are they going to take away? Now, we all want to believe that once we get post-Trump, this is going to be this post kind of normalizing of efforts, and let's hope we get there. But the reality is, we all know the old adage, power corrupts, and there is no guarantee that as conservatives, if we allow this president to continue to strip away rights and liberties like he has been doing, that does not become a norm that a future president, future Democrat president, could just say, you know what, maybe I don't like the Second Amendment. I can do that. Or I don't like your speech, and so every conservative gets wiped off the air. So we are setting dangerous precedents as conservatives, and that's one of the things I ended this week's column with. Is it's not the question whether that liberty can endure, but whether fellow Republicans will have the courage to defend it. I'm seeing it up there. We saw glimpses of that with the Kimmel. We saw the Ted Cruz's, and we saw others start to say, wait a minute, this is just a bridge too far. The sad part was we didn't see enough of that publicly, because I don't watch Kimmel. I've never watched Kimmel for a lot of the reasons that no other conservative watches Kimmel, right? He bashes Republican, goes after Trump every single time. And if he says something interesting, I'll watch it on social media. I think late night talk is a dying audience, and I've never understood going after 50% of your audience while you're trying to gain market share. But you know what? It's their right to sort of have that programming. It's not the government's right to say no.
Well,
right?
let me expand on that for a second. Because I think that we've opened a door now with the backlash against ABC. And I'm meaning pro-democracy humans and adults. I'm not saying just Democrats here.
Right.
It's your point. Will Republicans have the courage to defend liberty?
Right.
So it's just as much on Republicans as Democrats now.
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but the reason why that line sort of landed for me, because I think in earlier versions was just that, can we defend liberty? But as I got thinking about it, Republicans like me, who have a little bit of influence, people get seen, things do, like we are. But there were not enough Republicans that stood up that have influence. There were not enough people that went on TV and said these things. There were a lot of people that did, a lot of celebrities, a lot of Democrats, and some Republicans. And this should have been something that every single Republican stood up and said no. I also sort of want to go to Disney. Like, where are the great sort of business tycoons that are just like going to say to the government, there's no way you're going to tell me how to run my business. I don't care. Like, it just, Disney sort of just
Right. That's
folded
what
in that
Republicans
moment.
used to be about, right? It's free
Right, every
enterprise.
single time. Free enterprise. We're
Yeah.
not gonna tell you what to do. You go do it and you live or die. If you wanna run a program that is going to go after Republicans day in and day out, fine. You're gonna lose 50% of your audience. You probably aren't gonna last forever, so fine. But what we did see here is that Americans have two votes. They have the vote they do on election day, and
Right.
they have the vote they do with their wallet. And that's what they did. And stupid Disney, now I got an increase in Disney Plus and Hulu, which I thought was poor timing after this whole mess, but fine. But you they Americans exercise that vote, and Americans said enough is enough. Now, I think one of the problems, and I probably don't have enough time to touch on this, but I just think we've had a lot of things that have sort of just intersected that sort of allows this to happen. Yeah, yes, it's Trump out there rallying his base, but civics and school is not really being taught as extensive and understanding. American exceptionalism has been shit on along the way. It's social media treats freedom and liberty like a hashtag, and as a result, these basic foundations that we talk about, I mean, we're 75 years removed from World War II, probably the last great fight for freedom that we've seen. Every war since has been seen as a political endeavor, a partisan divide, and we've just sort of seemed to be losing this basic understanding of freedom and liberty and what it means and why we have separation of powers. And so nobody is really starting to demand accountability, except for right now we see it with speech. And I think that is something that Democrats and Republicans both need to build on. Going to your question,
Well,
you need new
and speaking of
leadership.
building on, I just want to sting one point in what you said, which
Sure.
is there's been some confusion out there about how Democrats, especially, but let's say all pro democracy people can, in the same breath, abhor the firing, the taking off the air of Jimmy Kimmel, and yet advocate for going after Disney financially. And the answer is there is a stark difference in kind between cancellation through financial means and the exercise of government power. The founders had no problem with using financial market means to express one's views. The Supreme Court has said that money is speech. Surely, if people can use their money in
Hmm.
campaigns, and that is speech, they can use their money for buying products and services, and that also is speech. That is very different. What the founders were afraid of was the exercise of government power in restraint of speech. What Donald Trump has done is fundamentally different and is not to be confused with a very real problem from the left. I will acknowledge that cancel culture on the left is a problem, has been overreached, has been excessive, especially on college campuses. There have been problems on the left.
Hmm.
So I am perfectly, I will acknowledge that, but it is completely muddying the waters. It is conflating two very different issues to say that's the same thing, which is why what I'm currently working on is okay, folks, we did Disney. Now let's do Sinclair. And you know what? If they're making the market decision, we're going to just give away half the audience. We don't care. We're catering them. Fine. The half of the audience that you're giving away, we are very free to express our market power through free enterprise. It's capitalism, baby. Yeah. And go after their advertisers, go after the cable companies that are carrying them. And
Hmm.
that is exactly what freedom loving people should do because we are fighting back against the exercise of government power in restraint of speech and our fundamental liberties.
And look, you are 100% correct on that. And I think this is the total misunderstanding. And I go back to this misunderstanding of civics right now. Freedom of speech exists in one realm, and that is Congress shall make no law. It is government cannot restrict speech. Speech and the right to assembly go hand in hand. It's the right to petition the government. It's why it's first, is because those are the things that government will attack. Those are the things that government will silence. and that is the linchpins of liberty. So the FCC does not, it is illegal, it is unconstitutional, it violates every premise of our republic for them to censor speech. The government cannot do it. Everyday Americans, if I don't like what you have to say, I have a right to say it. If I'm a private company, I have a right to limit what your speech can be and what you can say in the private confines. You have a right as an individual, if you don't like a particular speech, to exercise and go after them. And that's, I think, cancel culture was out of hand with Democrats. I do. But now it's on steroids and almost a level of McCarthyism at this point in time. And we're building lists and going after stuff. And that's wrong. I mean, it's just a pure violation of creating a scare where people are afraid to talk. We should be able to defend every speech. There's no carve out on what kind of speech the government can censor. They can't. It is free speech and totally different than what a consumer may do.
And I think, just to put a bow on this, because we both have a lot of writing to do here, apparently.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
It's the combination of the corruption and the authoritarianism. It's the violation of core principles that should be core conservative principles that I think. I was joking to you before we started recording that if Ronald Reagan were resurrected today and saw what was being done in the name of the Republican Party and conservatism, he would never stop throwing up.
Right.
And that is something that should be a wake-up call. And I hope you're successful in your project. I really am. I am looking for an avatar, a leader of a Republican clapback, a pushback, a resurgence, reclaiming.
Yeah.
Now, look, Jonathan Rauch and Peter Wehner on my show, they wrote an article. They talked about, what do they call it? An original Republican Party, a true, they wanted to bring back a core Republican Party. I support that as a Democrat because I think both parties are unhealthy when they are allowed to fester and have no restraint. That kind of unrestrained growth is called a cancer, and we're seeing it on the right, sort of. I mean, it's sort of the right wing. I don't even know what that means anymore.
It's not even the right, and that's the problem. Is
we're seeing it in the Republican Party.
Yeah, exactly.
And if there is a healthy conservative alternative to the Democratic Party that is a sane, rational, lawful party that respects the rule of law, that is not trying to extend authoritarian reach of the federal government, that is not trying to end the American project, then I will support it. I want it to exist because I don't want Democrats to go off the rails ourselves. I still think the Democratic Party is a worthy institution that has occasionally lost its way. We've had a little bit too much incursion from the far, far left, from my personal taste. But I still think we're healthily within the mainstream of American political thought. I can't say the same thing for the Republican Party, but I hope that you and people like you can somehow find a way to drag it back. So look, on that note, best of luck with your article. People can find you. You're all over. It's McClatchy.
McClatchy, yep.
It's all over. I said Gannett.
Yeah, it's fine, whatever.
You're all over McClatchy. People can find your work there and find your work here.
Yes, exactly. Hey, this was great. Always good talking.
All right, man. Well, I will see you soon.
See you soon.